Every act of creation is first an act of destruction. Pablo Picasso. We are witnessing destruction in real time between Israel and Palestine, the Gaza Strip. For the first time in history, one of the first times in history, we're witnessing that in real time. First-hand accounts of people who are documenting their experience via social media. At the same time, we're also watching the documentation of creation. It's no secret. War brings destruction. It's no secret. From the ashes of war comes creation. Welcome to Creative Rec with Richard Blacksher. Antonio Johnson is back, discussing how film was impacted by World War II. Yeah, I want to actually jump into your topic now. I don't.
Is it my topic?
Well, yeah, I'm just saying the time is going to be irrelevant for this episode. We're already at 25. We're already at 25 minutes. So Antonio.
Okay, so it's funny because you asked me what can I talk about for 30 minutes, and
here we are. We're at 25 minutes.
So fun fact, I was 2 classes away from minoring in history, and I did it totally on accident. Only because I'm a big fan of history. I've always been that way. It started from when my grandmother used to make me read like encyclopedias and stuff like that. So like, excuse me, anytime I needed like an extra class to fill up so that you can be considered full time, I would grab a history class. So I took so many history classes, and then it was literally like my last quarter. And my counselor was like, hey, did you know if you took 2 more history classes, you could minor in history? But I would have to come back another year. And I was like, not that serious. But yeah, I've always loved history. Even different. Matter of fact, there's a good Netflix documentary for you that I think I'm almost done with. It's a series. It's about the samurai.
Ooh.
Fantastic. Because I know you're into the Japanese culture. It's fantastic.
I am.
So it's all around like the 1500s in Japan and how different people and clans and all that stuff. I think you'd love it. But I am quite fascinated of American history around the World War, not just American history, but U.S. but world history around the world wars. Only because a whole lot changed.
And not a lot of time within 20 years.
Both wars, the first war was 4 years long. The second war was only 5 years long. And I really say only because we think of like are we still in the Iraq war? Like, I feel like we have these small but prolonged wars that last so much longer. But the World War II, for as big as it was, for how many people died,
right,
it only lasts 5 years.
It's very interesting because I know your point is going to be talking about French cinema, right? One of the stories that I'm reading with my kids right now is called Persepolis. It's a graphic novel, and it talks about the war between Iran and Iraq from the perspective of a child who grew up in it, Marjorie Satrapi, the author. And this is as I'm reading it, this is not the first time I've read the book, but it's for me, this all happens like 10, 20 years before I'm born. And it's like, wow, we've been in there for a long time. And not even like, even though the US isn't like directly involved, we're indirectly involved in the 80s and 70s.
Yeah, before that, that's what's so fantastic about that era. The only reason why there's strife in that area is primarily because of what we did post World War II, which was basically divided an entire nation and gave half of it to the displaced Jewish folks from Europe, which is what is modern day Israel. And that's what a lot of that beef is you've got 2 different descendants from families that are rooted in early Bible history.
Yeah, Abrahamic religions.
And the question is, who does this land belong to? It's our land. No, it's our land. No, it's ours. They stole it from us and gave it to you. And then there's all this beef between them and how the West has interjected itself, and so it's a lot of what we deal with today has to do with the reset of what happened with all the different powers.
Right. So how then does that play into cinema? Because again, from a comic books perspective, you see World War II. World War II is what puts comic books. It's what makes comic books a thing. It's Superman. It's Captain America.
They're the perfect villain. Like it's the perfect villain story. And there's so many. Even when you look at the allied powers, you look at them as this is the good team fighting the Axis powers, which are the bad team,
Yeah.
which makes for fantastic comic books if you want to pull a story out of us. And they're soldiers, so you want to pull a story about a soldier who fought to liberate people. That's basically what heroes do. They fight
So
to
then
save
how
people.
so then how do those stories of World War II influence how does World War II influence cinema?
So as we know, most of World War II was fought in Europe. Now, of course, there was our we were fighting on two fronts. We were helping
Mhm.
in Europe, but we were also fighting the Japanese. But we were doing most of that over there and on those islands. So, but most of the war was fought in like northern Africa and basically Central Eastern Europe, going kind of into Russia, but mostly
Mhm.
there. So, what you would imagine from a war involving like 8 or 9 different nations with lots of tons of bombs and all this stuff, you had a bunch of places that were ravaged because of it. And one of us, France. Also, you add into that the fact that Germany instituted a lot of bans when it came to the art that they allowed to come out. So
Right.
they really it wouldn't let certain things go that didn't, like matter of fact, that's the craziest thing. The first thing that Hitler ever did when he was in power was he banned pornography. So it's like there was a big,
Sorry.
yeah, it's crazy. That's the first thing he
Uh
did. Like
I,
he didn't do anything wild for like the first couple years he was talking a crazy game, but
yeah.
the first thing he did was ban pornography.
I may show this to middle school students, but I'll just
Come on,
bleep that
I
part
mean,
out.
come on.
No, I mean, you're right.
I'm not going into
No, we're not going to, but
explanation of
no,
what it
it's
is, but
very interesting. Now I got to explain that to
okay,
parents. No, but you're right.
he banned naughty videos
Oh, okay,
and
okay.
not and naughty movies.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And he there was a woman, her name was Lenny Riefenstahl. You'll fix it.
Yeah,
I
I got
believe
you.
that's how she said her name. And she was kind of like a matter. She was the one that near the dolly shot, like being on a rail and moving.
Yeah, she
So
she invented that.
I don't know if she invented it, but she kind of made it a thing because they used her for a lot of their propaganda. Matter of fact, there was a thing that they did um to advertise for the 36 Olympics, which were in Berlin, and it was a lot of her videos that kind of helped. Basically, did all the video promos for that. So
Wow.
she was a person that So, anyways, they knew, like us today. We were just finishing talking about how art can move a culture, and basically, I guess Hitler and his people felt like the way to get the people to believe what you want them to believe is by images.
Yeah.
So
What?
they.
And I don't want to cut you off, but I mean, I do want to interject. Like that is a very German thing. Germans do take their art very seriously, and they do hold their art in high
Oh no,
regard.
yeah, that's the
So
crazy
much
thing is
so,
that,
and this, even before the Nazis, there
well,
was,
in Europe in general, when it comes to like filmmaking, like they were like pinky out,
yeah,
drinking wine with cheese. Like they took the visual arts very serious, and they would have considered themselves high class, art connoisseurs.
right. I definitely will talk more about that in the preview to this. So then,
So yeah,
talk to
so
me.
so so they so you have that. So you have the censorship that was going on in Europe because there was one point where Germany occupied France. So you had the censorship mixed with the devastation of the country. So there was just a lot of stagnation in that area, which kind of sparked guys to think out of the box.
Hmm.
And like one of the first movies that it wasn't the first movie, but it was the biggest movie. I think it was one of the second or third movie to come out of that quote wave was called The 400 Blows. And it just some of the it's like the idea like
So
if you
I'm
look at
assuming it's more blows than 398.
yes.
Hmm.
So if you look at first, well, the thing about that is that movie, and I'm really man, no, I'm gonna look it up because I don't like not being able to cite people's work if it's a person.
No, I think that's
But
important. It's important to cite
basically,
evidence, or else we think you're a liar.
Francois Truffaut. So it was a movie about a kid, but it was based on his life.
Hmm.
So it was so the French New Wave is a whole big thing, and I don't even that's a whole another
I would say that's a yeah.
thing in itself. But basically, one of the things that it pioneered is this idea that a director can be an auteur and that what they did could have their fingerprint. Like before, movies were just made to be movies. And it wasn't necessarily that you saw a movie and like nowadays we'll see a Tarantino movie and think that's Tarantino. You know,
Right.
we'll see a Nolan movie and say, yeah, that's Nolan. But it used to be that there was like a cookie cutter way to make a movie. And it wasn't like artists weren't putting their thumbprint on it. And this was the start of an artist putting their thumbprint on their work. But they were doing that because they had to circumvent a lot of the disparity that they had at the time. So you saw a lot more like handheld shots. You
Hmm.
saw like this idea of the indie type filmmaking, like
Yeah.
shooting in front of shooting in a big crowd where the crowd doesn't know that you're shooting because you have such a small camera. I think there was one director in that time that pretended to be invalid and was in a wheelchair and to do their dolly shots and just had somebody push them around, but he was holding a camera like covered with a newspaper. So it's like people were in movies that didn't even know they were in movies because they were trying to basically the way we try to make our movies now because we don't have any money.
Pretty
Like
much.
that's a
But I
but
mean that
what
that
it
that is
did
a
is
yeah.
it sparked creativity
I
because
was
I
going to
didn't have
say
yeah.
I had a professor at CBU, and this is one of the biggest things that stuck it with me my whole life. Creativity thrives in constraint. So you can
Basically,
imagine
yes.
the constraint of a post World War II. Because how long ago is this after World War II?
Not that long. It was like the early I think it was like the early 60s. So you're talking maybe 10 years, 10, 15 years later.
So these are the kids that grew up with
Pretty
that
much.
devastation,
Yeah.
and so
They either fought in the war or they were, maybe just too young or but they weren't like old people and they weren't babies. Like they were fresh enough to remember everything that's happening and then able to also experience the economic disparities caused by the war.
so can I kind of want to tie it back in since I think I'm gonna just now use this whole footage. Um, what then does that say about the black
I'm sorry,
cinematographer?
late 50s.
Okay,
Just
yeah. So even so that even okay.
a little bit closer, but
So before I get to that question, then I do want to interject and say that's very interesting how the French are creating cinema in that way.
yeah.
When again you have the Japanese responding in a very similar way to the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki with the creation of Godzilla.
There's a lot of new, it's not like France is the only one that has a new, there's like an Iran new wave and like there's all these different nations that had kind of like a transition, but a lot of it had to do with the trauma that they all experienced.
Trauma
Like
and technology.
exactly. So a thing happened and now we have the ability to be able to tell a story in a certain way. So how can we tell a story and be true to what happened while also being creative with, so a lot of the types of shots that we see today that are just like regular
Mm-hmm.
were shots that like jump cuts. Like that wasn't a thing back then. The idea that you would jump cut through time, like why would you ever do that?
Right.
So just those things that we kind of look at and see and think, wow, maybe this guy or this woman knows what they're doing because they're experimenting with the medium, and that's what those guys did there is that they experimented, and that's really what was about. It was about experimenting and trying to do new things, trying to
Yeah.
circumvent the status quo that was the normal movie making, especially in a time when it was more difficult to make them.
Right. And again, I think that kind of well, now I definitely want to I want to tie this into, what we talked about earlier. As a black film director, or not even just you personally, but do you see that trend happening with, the medium right now? I mean, for me, outside looking in, I think my mind immediately goes to Michaela Cole with, a show like I May Destroy You, Issa Rae with all that she's doing with Insecure. Um, Ryan Coogler, all these young directors um, and filmmakers and TV makers. We are dealing with trauma in a way, but we definitely have access to technology. Um, do you see that? Is that something that's happening nationwide. Even though Michaela Cole is from England. But what is this? Is this reactionary to the Black Lives Matter movement, or is this was just gonna happen?
I don't know. Like I think it's one of those things. Like, did they know that it was a new wave in the middle of the wave, or was it a thing
Yeah,
that
that's a good point.
when you looked back and you were thinking, "What? Wow, that little like that patch of movies kind of changed the way the movies are being made." I think here it's less about the trauma. I mean, again, we know what goes on around here, but we have it a little bit better than our ancestors had it. So ours, I don't think ours is directly a direct response to trauma, but I do think it's
It's a
sort of
continual response to like,
kind of like an idea of new information, because
mm,
like we're the generation finding out about the things that our textbooks didn't tell us. So
right.
we're kind of responding to new old information. But I don't
Yeah,
think it's just that.
definitely.
I think it's also it's I think we're seeing a new wave just based on the industry, the way that the industry is. You're seeing all these newer, smaller production companies that are opening up. You're seeing like
A24.
even before COVID, the movie theaters were. I mean, the theater in America never was great. I mean, so but
Whoa.
there were like
I
no,
mean,
what I mean by great is as far as like a financial industry, like it's never been like booming here. Like that's the thing about
mhm,
even as big as this country is, I believe France has more theaters in France than America. Like America.
interesting.
Like they really like from a government standpoint, they really funnel money into the industry. So like they love it. Here, I think not as much. So it's like
Well, that's because we
I
don't
think
like the arts in general.
what's happening is we're starting to see like these new mediums. So I think here it's not so much trauma. It's not so much new trauma. It's the same trauma that's just imprinted in American history, but we're seeing new avenues and new ways to get it out. And the crazy thing is we're starting to see now, and this isn't just black people, we're starting to see the TV show shot in a cinematic way. So what you're
Mm,
seeing are directors like Ava
yeah,
who realizes that, hey, I have this story that I have to tell, but I don't want to confine it to 2 hours. Maybe I could tell this story and make it be 3 hours. Because that's always been the problem with a director, is you have to tell the story, but it can't be too long. Maybe you get to do a sequel, but everybody can't do sequels. But what if Netflix offers me a mini series for five episodes, an hour long? That now I can make my 3 movies
yeah.
and just break it up into because now we're seeing that you used to see what the way sitcoms used to be. Sitcoms weren't shot in a cinematic way. It was just kind of like being lights overhead, 6 different cameras, a studio, so, but now you're starting to see the single camera, the more noir style lighting,
Yeah.
and so I think it's not even we're starting to see that the movie screen per se is not the only way that you can get your story out. We're seeing people are doing it through all these streaming platforms, and we're seeing a whole bunch of them pop up, and all of them are dying to have new content. So, who are the ones that are most likely to go to them? It's us kids that aren't so married to the theaters. Like you heard about all those directors that were so angry about what HBO did, but
No, I didn't hear about those directors. Was one of them? Does one of
well,
them's name rhymes with Blarton Florflazy?
well, I'm pretty sure
Because you
he
know how
had
I feel
beef.
about that
I'm
guy.
pretty sure he had beef with it, but he wasn't on the. It's basically the slate that Warner Brothers was going to do, but they released. Like it started
Right. They just decided to put everything on HBO Max.
yeah, it started with Wonder Woman. Then it was the Little Things, and then it was just Judas and the Black Messiah.
And now
And you
it's
got to
Tom and Jerry.
yeah, but all these movies that were going to go to the theater, and then it just went to. It's still in the theater, but
Yeah.
released to. So like the directors that are cemented, they were the ones that had problems with it. But the rest of us that were like, hey, we have a shot to get our stuff seen. And
Yeah.
the funny thing is Shaka, they asked Shaka King this, how he felt. And he was like, honestly, he felt like it was better for them. Maybe not so much financially, but more he felt more people will see this movie than had it been in the theater. He was like, I didn't feel like this was a story that was going to get a billion. People weren't going to go to the theater to go watch Fred Hampton, but
Right.
maybe just because it popped up on their app when they opened it up, hey, I'll watch this.
Right.
So
And
for people
that,
like us, we see this as the opportunity to get our stuff heard, because maybe our stuff wouldn't, even if it made it to the theater, who was going to go watch our stuff? Because we're not a name brand. People go to the theaters to watch name brands.
and
Unfortunately,
even then, no,
that's
yeah,
the way it is now.
absolutely. And even then, it's a risk.
Yes, that's why we only want to go for stuff like Marvel and Star Wars.
We have to know we have to know it'll be good, or remix.
Yes.
And
that's what they're thinking. They also don't want to pour a whole bunch of money in it if they don't think they're going to get a return on their. But you have somebody like Netflix that's like, hey, I'm going to just give you this money to make something. Maybe it won't work, but maybe it will. And then that's when we get stuff like Ozark or Narcos or these shows that have like
Bridgerton,
have imprints on the culture. Bridgerton, The Crown, that just like they won
that
big.
continues.
They won big at the Golden Globes, but that's because there was a show or a network that decided, hey, come tell your story here.
Yeah. Which, again, that kind of goes back to that goes to opportunity. That goes to yeah. We're gonna wrap this up. So how we always end this series is I ask my guest just a question that kind of course I had this question in mind already. Antonio didn't know that I had this question, but I do know that especially since we're talking about film, Christopher Nolan is definitely one of our influences. Between the two of us when we work together, and because of that, this question definitely came to mind. So with that being said, what's the likelihood that when we sleep, we're actually just replaced by a clone of ourselves, but with the same memories, like in The Prestige?
I don't know about that, but I do have these ideas. I forget which philosopher it was that was like famous for bringing this up, but this idea of when you're asleep, is that actually when you wake up? And is this part of it? Is this the part that's to dream? And then when you actually fall asleep and you dream, is that actually real life? Us trying to remember what happened in real life, but we really can't.
People are usually more caught off guard by these questions, and you just wrecked it. You just gave a solid answer, and
I had to take philosophy twice because I failed it the first time. So I'm well aware. I'm well aware. I failed it the first time because there was. Never mind. I don't even want to get into it. And I didn't really like the teacher.
Oh.
But yeah. So I ended up hearing about the same people. I forget. I don't remember who it was. I don't think it was Plato, but it was somebody around him. I don't know if it was somebody right before him or right after him. But yeah.
Might have been Billie Eilish. I did see that documentary. That's another story.
I didn't see it.
I talked about Billie Eilish in Mike's episode, so I'm not going to go do it again.
So hey, here's how a guy named Hitler influenced the movies that you see today.
And this is how we end the episode.
No, that's nasty. I don't want to end by talking with Hitler. That was a bad guy. Don't.
Hitler was a bad guy. And again,
let's say it this way. No, let's say it this way. Here is how a totalitarian government forced new creativity because of the impact that they created, the destruction that they created, and out of that, a rose grew from the cracks.
God, you could have said that so much. You just had to say the word cracks.
From the cracks.
So we're saying out of devastation.
The concrete cracks.
God, and you're not getting it.
I wanted to be clear what crack I was talking about.
Out of devastation.
The rubble.
That's better.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, let's go with rubble.
From the rubble.
Because you were like really committed to cracks. And I was like,
I mean, what is rubble but cracked concrete? I mean, I don't know.
Now you're saying cracked. And I think at this point you just really are wanting to say the word crack. This episode is going to be so hard to edit. It's probably not going to get edited. This has been Antonio Johnson from the Tone Deaf Podcast. I think about Pablo Picasso. By all accounts, Pablo Picasso's first attempts at painting was masterful. His rise to fame, though, didn't come until he started deconstructing what painting could look like. And that's creation. When you could look at something for what it is, break it down, and say, nah, this might be better ugly.